There's a new used Carmageddon happening right now, with as many as 350,000 vehicles getting scattered across the United States and Canada. It promises to represent a real risky buying proposition for used car buyers. A whole pile of new challenges and new issues, and I told you a mere month ago that this was going to happen, and we're seeing it. There's a whole pile of used vehicles starting to hit the market. As many as 350,000 units are scattered across, and sadly, many unsuspecting buyers are getting absolutely screwed by the simple fact that many of these cars are a result of that catastrophic hurricane that we merely saw a month ago. Back with states like Texas and Florida leading the charge for number of flood vehicles, it represents a real risky proposition. It's bad enough that buyers have to go out there armed with the information to look for damage, problems, accident history, service history. Now we got to think about whether a vehicle was flooded. I want to share some of those tips that you really have to watch for. You really have to do your homework, because in many cases, insurance takes care of it and the vehicle gets tossed. But in many other cases, some people get their vehicle, it might have mild flood damage, and people are just relegated to possibly vacuuming it out, pulling out the seats, pulling out some of their carpets, let it air dry, and then try to sell it on the used car market. But there's a lot of negative consequences to a vehicle that's been under water. Extreme consequences with the highly technical vehicles. The electronics that you find buried in these vehicles these days means that this is a massive risk. Gone are the days of a simple carbureted vehicle and a manual gearbox and crank windows. Today, every vehicle is powered by expensive electronics, modules, battery powered, and all kinds of computing power. Just means that anything that goes underwater is at serious risk. And every module could cost you $2,000, $3,000, $4,000. And anything is suspect. So you definitely have to know what to watch out for. And now that we're on the back end of what we've seen with that hurricane, I knew this would happen, and I promised you as a resident automotive expert that we were guaranteed to see these vehicles. So if you're out shopping for used cars, make sure that you follow a simple strategy and look for these items that I'm going to share with you to make sure that you don't get caught up buying a flooded out wreck. And unfortunately, this can actually wreak a lot of havoc. So, transmissions, most of them are vented. You get water in there, mixing it around with a transmission, you definitely want to do a flush before you even drive it. Engine, it's also not sealed. You put water above the top of the engine, you're going to get migration of water into the engine. Also a bad scene. Corrosion, as well as mixing with oil, means that you can have a recipe for disaster. We don't even want to forget about all the electronics. So there's definitely going to be some things you want to look out for, because chronic exposure to moisture in electronic components just means you could have intermittent failures, challenges with things working, not working, or intermittently coming and going. And if you start adopting situations like that, where maybe a sunroof works this time and next time it won't, or you're getting some strange lights behind the dashboard, that might be a sign that you've got some water migration going on there. But let's get to it. So if you're doing your search, make sure you do your Carfax, do your search, find out where these vehicles lived most of their lives. You can have a quick look and make sure that you know whether that vehicle resided or was last registered in a particular state or province. Make sure you pull that information out, because if it was in Florida, there's a good possibility it has seen some water. But there's some key areas that you definitely want to be aware of, because there's at least as many as 350,000 vehicles now hitting the market that were potentially exposed to a lot of this flood damage. For example, Miami and Fort Lauderdale has seen as many as 23,200 flooded cars. Fort Myers, Florida, and Naples, 11,000 flooded cars. Tampa to St. Petersburg, Sarasota, 8,700 flooded cars. And Orlando to Daytona Beach, Melbourne, you could see as many as 8,500 flooded cars. And sadly, Texas wants to be included in this number game as well, because in Houston alone, based on CarMax numbers, we're seeing as many as 29,000 vehicles were flooded. And as well, Dallas has potentially almost as many as 13,000 vehicles that were exposed to flood damage. So hurricanes have flooded nearly 350,000 cars in 2024 alone. And plenty of those actually wind up in cities on the eastern coast. New York, Chicago, you name it, they get scattered across. And usually people are trying to get them, title wash them, pardon the pun, sending them to other states to get re-registered and of course put them out to market. A lot of times they want to disassociate those vehicles from the founding state where they were initially flooded, so they end up exporting those to other states and people often get snookered. So if you're coming from one of the Eastern Board type of states, beware, exercise extreme caution to make sure you do those checks, because there's a good possibility that somebody threw a bunch of these on the back of a flatbed or on the back of a car hauler and started moving those around the country, only to find out that you, possibly in Minnesota, might be negotiating a deal on a vehicle that was underwater in Houston. So it's all pretty much buyers beware. So there's some key elements you want to be looking for. The first thing you want to be checking for are strange mustiness and odors. That almost seems like a given. But you know, the old smell you get from those old British cars like MGs and Triumphs when you get in there, because they always leak, they never kept water out. Well, that's the same effect. You know, you get in one of those old classic British cars and you're going to have that musty smell in there. Well, that's, if you're driving and you're looking at negotiating at maybe a possibly late model Lexus and all of a sudden it has that musty smell in it, that might be a sign there could be some moisture underneath that got soaked into the carpet, soaked into the seats, and even though it might have been put out to dry and sucked clean, it could in fact still have that musty odor to it. There could be mold developing and water migrating into a lot of the electronics and wiring harnesses, waiting to cause big problems. Another thing you've got to be looking out for is silt, rust. I mean, a lot of areas shouldn't typically get that, but look in places like under the seats, on the seat rails, maybe glove boxes, in frame sections, possibly look under the dash. Look in areas that are suspect, hard to get at, because those are the areas that if somebody was quickly cleaning a car, a lot of times that silt just builds. Salt water, of course, leaves residue, and you're going to have that salty film, or just sand and silt that just came in off the ocean floor. A lot of that material just makes its way through a vehicle, and there's areas and corners of the vehicle that you can't actually properly clean. So those are the areas you want to look for. Look in the hinge areas, look in the chassis, open the door, look down in between where the fender and the door hinges meet up. Look in those areas, look underneath everywhere that is hard to get at. Bring a flashlight, do a good look around. If you're seeing a lot of silt in areas that there shouldn't be silt, there's a good chance that vehicle was exposed and possibly underwater. I would say don't walk away, run away from those scenarios. Another thing you want to be looking out for are lights. You know, the lights where they're a little bit foggy or misty, or you look in there and there's some condensation or some humidity behind them. Now, there are some cars out there that generally do that. A lot of LED headlights nowadays don't generate the heat to burn off that moisture. And so that's not an uncommon thing if you have a bad headlight or a bad seal. I've seen cars, brand new cars that are totally dry that have that condensation. But look around, look at the taillights, look at the headlights. You'll get a good sense of whether these lights have a musty film. Some of these dashboards too, look behind the gauge cluster. Sometimes you'll see moisture in behind there. That is a surefire giveaway that there's been some moisture in that vehicle, way more moisture than there should be, and a good chance it was underwater. So look for that fogginess, that haziness in plastics behind light fixtures and all of those areas. Maybe even look up underneath and the dome lights. Check all those areas and look for moisture in those spots, because those might be surefire giveaways that that vehicle was exposed to heavy amounts of water. Another thing you really want to watch out for is for the upholstery. If you're looking in the vehicle and this vehicle has 75,000 miles on it, you're going to expect a certain amount of wear and tear. You're going to see some in the carpet. You might see on the bolsters of the driver's seats, and from people getting in and out, you're going to start to see the cracking, wearing, a little bit of wear and tear. It should be indicative to what your mileage is saying. So if you're saying you're 75,000 miles and a seat looks absolutely brand new, and maybe the back seats look a little more worn, but yet the front seats are new, or vice versa. Or maybe this front carpet looked brand new and fresh, but the back carpet isn't. Something doesn't match up. All the seats, all the carpets look like they should represent the mileage that's listed on the clock. And if you're finding areas that are replaced, or they look like they're brand new where other areas aren't, then it might be another surefire reason that somebody's trying to hide something or trying to pitch it, because a lot of times these seats just get absolutely drenched, they get ruined, and a lot of times it's just easier to buy a new set of replacement seats for $1,000 or $2,000, drop them in, and it gives it a new lease on life. But that, unfortunately, is a street curber's way of getting that vehicle out to market. And these people are unscrupulous, they're ruthless, and you as the buyer have to be aware of some of these challenges and scams that some of these people are doing, and they're trying to pull on you and I. So you have to be looking at, make sure all the seating and the carpets and all of the upholstery looks to match with the appropriate mileage. It looks like it all fits and matches appropriately. The colors line up. And especially if you're talking about states that are typically getting a lot of flood potential, the Floridas and the Texas, you're going to see a lot of sun. There's going to be natural sun fading. And you know, a car that's been sitting out for a long period of time might see natural fading. You might see it in the dash, you might see it on the arms, on the seat, on the door cards. But the seats themselves may look brand new and shiny, and you always just, if it doesn't smell right, it's probably not right. So look around, take a good look at the upholstery, make sure there's no moisture in it, make sure it's not crunchy. The other thing I want to comment on carpets. Now years ago, many years ago, I used to clean carpets for a living back when I was just in high school. And I do know that right after you steam clean or clean some carpets, there's sort of a crustiness to it. You know, when you buy a brand new car, the new carpet has a sort of nice, pliable, smooth feel to it. And it has a nice aroma. But when a vehicle has been freshly steam cleaned, that carpet often, it comes out feeling, once it's dry, it's kind of hard and abrasive. And so give that feel there and make sure if it has that feeling and the carpet feels rough and a little bit rough and abrasive, then there's a good chance it's been steam cleaned. Now that doesn't mean that people don't like to take care of their carpets, and you know, a little detailing will do the same result, but it's just more, you know, reasons to start asking the hard questions. And again, ultimately Carfax is the way and the go-to. Make sure you're looking for, you know, tracking that VIN number, making sure that there's no accident history, and making sure you have a good way to track down where this vehicle was and where it's headed. So always do your homework and ask a lot of questions. Another thing you want to check for are the obvious electrics. Operate everything. If there's a car you're looking at and it's sort of suspect and you don't, you know, it's not definitive as to where it was, make sure you try every electronic device in the car. Everything. It doesn't matter. Take those extra 15, 20 minutes. Try it all. Each power window, power locks. Try the mirrors, front and back, left and right. Try it all. Sunroof, operate it all. Headlights, low beams, fog lights. Try all your backup camera. Even try all your safety equipment. Try your infotainment system. Everything. Everything that you can have. Even use your key fob. Make sure everything's functioning as it expected to. Absolutely walk through every feature and electronic component within that car, because sometimes some things can work, but modules, there's usually modules. There's an ABS module, because remember, this can also impact your safety components. ABS, of course, airbags, those have separate modules, and if you cook those components, not only is it an annoyance or you have fog in a light, but you could actually have a vehicle that's unsafe to drive. So you want to make sure you try everything out. If the owner or the seller is even willing to allow you to plug in your code reader, wouldn't even hurt to maybe plug in a code reader and pull your own codes, make sure everything looks clear. Now granted, not every seller is going to want you to do that, but either way, try every electronic device that's known to that particular vehicle and make sure that it all works. Make sure there's no check engine lights, make sure there's no weird service lights or no fault codes on any of the devices, because remember, again, like I've said, ABS, traction control systems, a lot of your power windows, they all have these separate modules, and then there's usually a main ECU for the brains, and then there's a TCU for the transmission, and there's all these little smaller modules that feed in to the main ECUs. So one module could be failed, but the rest of the system could be working, so you may actually not have a problem until you activate that device. Try every single electronic component just to be sure. So here we are, a month and a half later, and I told you, I promised you this would happen, and it's coming to fruition. According to CarMax and according to many experts, including myself, I've already seen and heard stories, horror stories from people already getting snookered by cars that have been underwater. So make sure you do all your checks, pull the car proof on it, and check the Carfax. Make sure there's no accident history, look for flood damage, but most importantly, do the roadside checks. Give it the walk up, give it the walk down. Make sure there's no major problems there with it. And be sure to get yourself a good, clean, dry car that's free of accidents and has a good service history. Of course, with that right there, on my other car channel, Exotic Car Play Place, you're going to want to check roadside checks on how to do a proper inspection. This is the layman's approach, not a mechanic's. I mean, a PPI is always the best way to go. But if you want to do some quick checks, be sure to check out, that's your top to bottom on overlooking a car inspection on the roadside. Great for you and I, for basically inspection for dummies like me. Anyway, hope to see each and every one on the next one. We'll see you all real soon. Bye-bye.